Libby, I don't know if I've told you this story yet, but it's to do with one of our dear friends and one of your most favourite swimming colleagues, Ellie Cole.
I'm obsessed with Ellie. She is an icon of Paralympics, movement, of swimming, one of my absolute favourites.
A little Australian girl, Maggie, had a sarcoma, which is a type of cancer wrapped around her leg that doctors had tried to treat and remove, but it eventually became clear that she would need to have a leg amputation.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like for her parents and what an absolutely harrowing conversation it would have had to be.
And when they did have that conversation, one of the first things Maggie said is that she wouldn't be able to play basketball or swim or run. And at that moment, her parents were able to play for her a video that Ellie Cole had recorded specifically for Maggie that talked about determination and ability and the fact that Ellie wouldn't have changed her life for anything.
Thinking about that, it just confirms for me in my mind why Ellie is one of my favourite people in the whole world.
And the parents described watching Maggie watch that video and seeing her literally pivot in front of their eyes. And I should point out that that's not the first time Ellie has done a video like that for a family.
Of course not.
And I think for Ellie, what it also helped her do is something for a family that her family didn't receive when Ellie was told that she would have to have her leg amputated back in the 1990s.
And to be honest, I think that is worth just as much as any gold medal. This is Sportish. I'm Libby Trickett, a sports fanatic, mum of 5 children, and many, many years ago, I was an Olympic swimmer.
And I'm Georgie Trickett. I used to swing a softball bat for my state as a junior, and like Libby, I spend a lot of time in the car driving my kids to sports training. This series of Sportish is powered by Play Well, a movement from the Australian Sports Commission that's about making sure everyone has a place in sport.
Ellie Cole, a big Sportish welcome to you.
Oh, thank you. Sportish back to you.
Oh, I love that. Ellie, when you were 3, you had your leg amputated, and then 8 weeks later, your mum had you back in a pool, ready to go. What message did that send to you as a child?
Oh, well, that's hard. It is hard to remember back in those days. So I was only 3 when I had my leg amputated, and it's quite interesting because when your body goes through quite a lot of trauma, there are often times where your mind will just block out parts of your childhood that are quite traumatic. And so I don't actually remember too much of my childhood, probably up until I was about 7. But in terms of like the family footage and everything that I've seen and I guess stories that I've heard from my family, starting my rehabilitation journey, it really was a huge silver lining in kind of setting me up for the rest of my life. And as I've gotten older and, gotten to know quite a large number of Paralympians, obviously, I've kind of come to this realization that when life is really hard, it teaches you a lot of things quite quickly. It's almost like a survival of the fittest mentality. And so I think losing my leg at the age of 3, I really did have to learn this whole like survival of the fittest, how to adapt, how to be really agile with everything that I do. And it honestly has set me up so well, not only for being an athlete when I first began swimming, but even in retired life, into motherhood, going into business and all of those other aspects of life. Yeah, having a challenging life at the very beginning, obviously, came with its trials and tribulations, but I look back and I really wouldn't have had it any other way.
What sort of relationship did you have with sport, and what relationship did your family have with sport? Obviously, your mum was passionate about getting you into the pool, but what did that look like for you growing up?
I think we grew up in a pretty idyllic childhood when it came to sport. We were just a sports-loving family. We watched a lot of AFL, the AFL Grand Final every year was this huge like barbecue in our house and everything. But we just always loved swimming in particular. And I'm not really sure what it was about the swim team. Maybe it's because you were on there, Libby. But we
Thanks for stroking my ego. I appreciate it.
I'll do that many times throughout this next hour. But yeah, for some reason, swimming was always something that really stood out to our family. And it was probably off the back of the Sydney 2000 Games. And I think all of Australia was so in love with the swim team. But we just really loved sport. We loved the idea of, just playing a game of backyard cricket. I think for us, it was a real way for us to bond as a family, particularly when I became sick. our family became quite segregated because my parents were in hospital taking care of me and the rest of my family were back at home. And sport was one of those almost like leveling the playing field where we would just forget about everything that had happened in our lives and, all of the bad times and just celebrate these beautiful little moments together and these nice little touch points together. And so it was really, I suppose, a bridge into us recovering as a family was just to play as much sport as we could. So we were a sports-loving family, but it's been really interesting because as I've become older, I stayed on the Australian swim team until I was about 30. But the only person that really does play sport in my family now is still my twin sister, and she's on the shooting team. So it's a different type of sport in a way. But I think, we've always just really enjoyed more the community aspects, which now that I've retired, I've kind of come full circle and I really enjoy those aspects too now.
Ellie, you went to school in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I think so.
I did some maths and I'm pretty sure that's when you went. And when you got there, like many kids, you wanted to participate in sport. How did you find teachers and coaches treated you?
Oh, that's a good question. When I first started at my local swimming club, there was one other person there who joined at the same time that had a disability. Apart from that, my club didn't really have any understanding of disability. They didn't have any knowledge about how to coach somebody that had a disability. And I had quite a low needs disability as well. I wasn't high needs. So I integrated quite well into an able-bodied program because that was really my only choice. And same with school. I went to a mainstream school, but my teachers didn't really understand disability sport. They didn't even know, it's the School Sports Victoria had this like whole para-athlete pathway that they could go through. So I was trying to like qualify for our school nationals as an able-bodied swimmer. And I would always, make it through to regionals, and then sometimes I would make it to state, which I was really proud of, but never would make it onto the national team until one of my school teachers one day discovered that there was this like para-adaptive athlete pathway that I could take. And then I was like at school nationals and I was like kicking everyone's ass and having the best time. But so there wasn't really like a pathway for me that I grew up in. I grew up in the able-bodied system because there just wasn't anything else for me. And I think that there's a huge opportunity lost there with high needs athletes. They didn't, high needs athletes don't have a choice. They certainly need an, adapted or inclusive club, or they need a school that understands what parasport is. But I had none of that. So I was very fortunate though that I had a very eager swimming club and a very eager school that were keen to learn and keen to be able to find options or ways for me to be able to join more high performance settings that weren't necessarily there. So, my coach, for example, in swimming, you use this like piece of equipment called a pool buoy to hold your legs up. And I really struggled being able to use a pool buoy. And so my coach like got a milk carton and he just poked all these holes in it and tied it around this belt. And that was my way of increasing the drag in the pool. So I think my coaches and the sports administrators, my teachers actually all really relished in the chance to just do things a little bit more differently than they had been doing for 10, 20, 30 years. And they absolutely loved that chance. It is very different now. So we're very fortunate. But back in my day, it was a different story.
I think that's a really interesting point because you touched on the sort of low needs disabilities versus high needs disabilities. And when we're looking at the kind of the Paralympic movement, it feels like we've come a long way, as you mentioned, but people with a disability are still 60% less likely to meet national physical activity guidelines. Where do you feel like there's still room for improvement?
Well, I think if you think of the activity guidelines, people already struggle to meet these guidelines because of just everyday life that gets in the way.
Busyness.
You've got kids, work, and you really have to be quite intentional or start making the habits to then make it a little bit easier on yourself. So I feel like exercise for me is like brushing my teeth. It's just a habit. It's hopefully something that I don't have to think too much about. But for a lot of people, it's not a habit for them. And so, it can be quite challenging to be able to make better choices and to make that change into forming really positive habits when it comes to exercise. But then when you add a disability on top of that, it becomes incredibly and more increasingly inconsistent in being able to meet these guidelines. So if you think just how hard it is for everyday Australians to meet these activity guidelines, and then you add a disability on top of that and all of the barriers that come into play, whether that's accessibility, whether that's, finances or adaptive equipment, it becomes even more so. Some people can't even get into the front door. And I think that's something that we as Australia really need to look at is what our infrastructure looks like, how accessible our spaces are. What's really promising is that new spaces that are being designed now all have accessibility in mind, but it's all of the ones that need to be retrospectively changed. And unfortunately, it is quite expensive to do that. But it starts with really small changes. In fact, I was watching this video on Instagram last week about our Minister for Disabilities. His office isn't even accessible.
Wow.
So there's like 4 steps to get into his front door. And then it had this sign saying, if you have a disability and you need a ramp, ring this doorbell at the back where the loading dock was. And so this guy went around to the back to ring this doorbell, and the doorbell was actually missing from its casing.
Goodness.
So, I see moments like that about how I would love Australia to be more and more accessible, but when you see our Minister of Disability, you can't even get into his front door. I do have some serious concerns. But we are very fortunate that we are hosting an Olympics and Paralympic Games in Brisbane, and clubs will hopefully be able to see, more grants coming in to be able to make their club spaces a lot more inclusive as we come into the Brisbane 2032 Games.
If you put sort of that physical spaces component aside and note that grants do come through and there's opportunities for clubs and associations to access them when they can, what are some of the other things that clubs and associations can do to make their spaces more inclusive and more accessible for people with a disability?
I think a lot of clubs, and I know this sounds cliche, but people really do see it as this box ticking exercise. And I think a huge opportunity that we have is that we can actually reframe what an inclusive club can do for our own clubs. So the whole point of being a local sporting club, even a national sporting organisation, is to build our membership bases. And we have 2.7 million Australians who say, hey, look, I'm right here.
I'm ready to go.
Sign me up, coach. I want to go. But there's a lot of barriers that come into place when it comes to people with disabilities accessing sport. And unfortunately, there are a lot of clubs who do want to do the right thing, but are so afraid of offending somebody or so afraid of maybe taking one little wrong step that they don't do anything at all. And so one thing that clubs can really do to be able to become more inclusive, firstly, is to see it as a real opportunity. If you think about why you enroll your kids into a sporting club, it's to be able to build these amazing life skills that they can then take on for the rest of their lives. Now, if you have kids who are seeing people who are different to them or who have walked a different life, who have a different background to them, and creating this amazing sense of belonging, working through interpersonal skills, being able to figure out despite whatever someone's background is, we can still work together as a team. We can still achieve this common goal. Like, where else can you learn those skills from a young age? It's an amazing opportunity to have these inclusive clubs. And kids that are able to be in these inclusive clubs then go on to have much better mental health outcomes, much stronger sense of self. But then the second thing that clubs can do, even if they don't have the money to make things more accessible at that time, is to be able to upskill, your coaches, upskill your staff onto how to better cater for people with disabilities, how to coach people with disabilities, how to ask questions when it comes to disability as well. One thing that's really remarkable is, I've grown up with my niece who's now 11, and she's grown up around all these Paralympians and myself with a disability. And her disability literacy is nuts. Like, her ability to be able to talk to people and ask them questions and feel really confident and, just break down those barriers is incredible. And that's purely through exposure. So there's heaps of opportunity there. There's ways that we can, upskill our workforce, upskill our coaches, just even open the doors and be more approachable as a club. And, almost just say, hey, we'd love to have you here. How can we make this work? That's an amazing question that you can ask. How can we make this work? And see what you can do. The difficult thing is that clubs are often really under-resourced and rely so heavily on volunteers. But it honestly is about just making those little steps that can make a huge difference to somebody's life.
You've obviously competed at 4 Paralympic Games. I've already said how you're our greatest of all time. You're incredible. The Australian Paralympic team is one of the country's most celebrated sporting teams. What impact do you feel like the Paralympic movement have on people with disabilities?
I think the Paralympic team not only have an impact on people with disabilities, but, the entire country. It's
100%.
It's been honestly really remarkable to see. And a lot of people didn't know about the Paralympic team when I was young. I didn't even know about it. So I can't expect the rest of the world to. But it really does have such a positive impact on, people with disabilities as well as the members of the Paralympic team itself. But what I will also say is that it can be quite dangerous because Paralympic sport is this like weird enigma, right? Where athletes with disabilities are contradicting everything that people have thought about disability before. So when I was young, if you thought about somebody that had a disability, it would be probably quite a negative image. The media portrayal was always really negative. You know, I would go to a national swimming championships with my able-bodied teammates and they would say like, James and Justin are going over there to like tear it up and win gold medals. And then like, little Ellie's going over to make a splash. I'm like, I'm also going there to tear it up.
Tearing it up.
And so, you know, the sport has really turned on its head what people think of disability. So if you thought back to the Sydney 2000 Olympics, Paralympic Games, not many children would have been able to correlate disability and like champion in the same sentence. You know, it just wasn't the relationship that those two words had. But now that this Paralympic movement has grown and people really understand like the strength that people with disabilities have, especially in their sense of self and interpersonal skills and all of that, it's turned everything that we know about disability on its head. But unfortunately, if you step out of the Paralympic world and into everyday life, you see like barriers, you know, to enter the workforce, to enter school, all of these social and cultural barriers when it comes to disability.
The Minister for Disabilities office.
Exactly. You see all of these barriers that I saw when I first started in my swimming career. So it's like sport has evolved so well when it comes to disability, but the rest of Australia not necessarily has. And so there's this like sense within our disability community that there are some people with disabilities who get really frustrated by the Paralympic movement because someone might see them with no vision or with a guide dog or in a chair or having cerebral palsy and say like, are you a Paralympian? And they're like, no, like I like to garden and I love to do maths and like I'm an awesome actuary, you know? And people seem to like be a bit taken aback by that. And like, oh, well, would you like to be a Paralympian? And like, no.
Also no.
Are you sure?
So they're that 1 in 4 people that don't want to play sport, you know? So I think the Paralympic movement has been great for more so for people without disabilities in terms of teaching them about, you know, what we truly are capable of, what we can be really capable of, you know, how resilient human beings can be, how we can overcome challenges. But people with disabilities can still really struggle with that whole self-identity when it comes to Paralympics. And I used to train in a swimming program with Kate and Bronte Campbell. So I was in this like Olympic training program, but I was like this para swimmer that was there. And I remember I was having this conversation with Kate one day. We was at a national swimming championships and it was right after the Rio Olympic Games. And in Rio, she was expected to win the gold medal, but she didn't. And she said to me, you know, the year after, it's really interesting, like the difference between Olympic and Paralympic athletes, because she said, you know, when I competed at Rio, I had to turn my social media off. I was getting all of these death threats and terrible media articles written about me. And she's like, but as a Paralympian, you know, you could come like last and people will still celebrate you. I always think that people can relate more to Paralympic athletes than Olympic athletes because of, you know, that adversity and, you know, almost that underdog mentality that lifts us up.
Like an exposed humanity.
Yeah, it honestly brings, I think Paralympians bring out the best parts of being human. But, you know, I see sometimes the reception of Olympians, you know, when they perform well, we love them. But if they don't perform well, it's sometimes really hard to watch the way that that's received by the Australian public. And I feel like in ways that can bring out almost the worst parts of humanity. So now working in the media, I'm really conscious of that and, you know, I really want to showcase our Olympians as well and to showcasing that like everyone has these struggles. Being an Olympian is so hard and the pressure that comes with that as well. Paralympians, you know, we have pressure, but it's definitely in a different sense.
I wanted to talk to you a bit because obviously you're, as we've spoken about, you're an athlete with a disability, but you're also a woman.
Yes, I am.
And I wanted to understand if, you know, being a female athlete, has that ever created an additional challenge for you in accessing sport?
I'm very fortunate. I can't recall any moments that it has created a challenge. But then again, I come from a sport where our women's side is so incredibly successful.
We do rock.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So I was myself was inspired by all of these amazing female Olympians. I wish I could say Paralympians, but I didn't know about the Paralympics when I was going through my participation sports side of things. So I had Petria Thomas and Susie O'Neill, and you're on there, Libby, and Jodie Henry, and Stephanie Rice as well. I still remember eating this particular old gold dark chocolate block when she won her 200 IM in Beijing. Yeah,
That's hilarious.
I love
These
the
are
Olympics.
core memories.
Yeah, I've got heaps of core memories. I've told you about Libby's win in the 100 fly. Skipped school for that one. Maths class, actually.
I mean, look, I don't condone that, but also thank you.
It was the greatest day of my life, so it's fine. Thank you. Anyway, back to the question. I think I come from a very unique sport where the female side is so well supported by our national sporting organisation. But it's frustrating now as an older athlete, especially when I moved to the AIS in Canberra. I lived with, the rowing team, the basketball team, and I definitely saw the segregation between the men's side and the women's side. And yeah, we do still see it. And a lot of that is this unbiased consciousness and cultural shift, which can take a really long time. But you see some incredible women who are, stepping up and always have to go 20% harder at it to be able to be seen in the same way.
It's interesting to me that you've had such wonderfully inclusive environments in your sport. And yet one of the least inclusive environments you were involved in had nothing to do with your disability, but it had to do with your gender, and it was when you were the only female swimmer in an all-male squad.
Oh, yeah. I don't think about that too often. So that did not come to my mind.
No, but I'm interested in what that experience was like.
So I, despite being in a sport that was quite inclusive to females as a national sporting organisation, I actually found myself in a swimming club that wasn't. So after the, when you have to think about your career.
Wait, which Paralympics was it? There's so many.
So after the London, hold on. After the Rio 2016 games, my coach, he relocated to a new swimming club. And so I relocated up to the Sunshine Coast and joined this swimming club. But I was, at the time, the only female in this. It was quite a small club. It was actually a Paralympic hub. We only had 2 Paralympic hubs in Australia at the time, one at the AIS and one up at the Sunshine Coast. And so I found myself in this inclusive Paralympic hub, but I was the only female. And I was like, that's fine. I've been around boys my whole life. I know how to kick it. It's all going to be good. But I just found it really interesting. One-on-one, these guys were great, I could have really great conversations, go really in depth. But then when they came together, it was who are you kind of thing. But these little comments would just start slipping to me. I would try and contribute something to a conversation or something towards our training set, and they would be what do you know? You're just a girl. And I'm like, okay, know a bit more about you because I won a gold medal and you haven't.
All right, mate.
I'm a gold medalist, actually.
Yeah, these comments just started to become more and more aggressive and things that you wouldn't want to repeat in a room like this. And I remember this one comment in particular was made to me that was just the most offensive thing that you could say to a woman. And I've pretty thick skinned. You think when you grow up with a disability and you have to push against brick walls your whole life, you are quite a resilient person. I was that comment is not okay, but it didn't upset me all that much, but it made me angry that someone could actually say those things in an environment like that. And so after training, I went into the changing rooms and I was talking to a very well-known swimmer about it. And one of the members of the public was in the change room and she overheard my conversation. And she was so disgusted by these comments that were being made towards the women in the program that she went and then reported it to our high-performing sports program. And the next day I got a call to go into the office before training. And I got reprimanded for speaking about it in public too loudly and really their words affecting the reputation of the program. And so I tried to kind of rectify the culture or try to improve the culture, but it was just at a place where if the leadership weren't going to make those changes, then it was never going to change. And so I ended up leaving that program. But what was remarkable about making the decision to leave that program is that the staff there got so upset because at the end of the day, I think I'd was like a 15-time Paralympic medalist.
So
I was walking out on this
medals.
program. They got like so, like when people just get like personally offended and take things so personally, that they kind of threw my name under the bus in the whole like swimming community. And so no coach would take me on because it's like they were all talking and you're
a difficult woman.
That is exactly what the narrative was. So there was this talk that I was difficult to work with.
You seem really difficult,
I was
Ellie.
apparently really
Awful.
difficult to work with. So that's actually how I ended up training with the Campbell sisters.
Wow.
Is because no para coach at the time was wanting to take me on because I was being perceived as being quite difficult. But then I knew that my coach wouldn't have the balls to talk to Simon Cusack. So that's how I ended up with the Campbell sisters, and in the most inclusive environment you could possibly imagine. Like, Simon had never coached a para athlete before, but he was always, what do you need? What can I do? How can I make this place better for you? And he really saw having a para swimmer in the program as an opportunity for them to learn from a para side and for me to learn from an Olympic side and to make the whole program stronger. And it was just the most beautiful way to end my swimming career. I spent 3 years in that program, and I look back and thankfully I was able to be in such an inclusive space, because I look back on my career. If I had kind of finished around that Rio time, I would have probably had a bad taste in my mouth with my swimming career. But now if I reflect back on that program that I was able to leave with Kate and Bronte, then I have really good memories.
There are so many incredible lessons that you've obviously drawn from your Paralympic swimming and your career. You've even found your wife, Sylvie, through the Paralympics and through that movement. With your partner, Sylvie, and your now young son, Felix, what do you want for him when it comes to sport?
I always thought that I wanted to, be the best in the world at something. And like, it is great, winning.
Not going to lie.
The view is excellent.
If I'm honest.
Yeah, it is great. But if I kind of look back on my career now, it was the times when I wasn't winning or when things were really hard that I appreciate the most in my career. And so if I think about my son Felix growing up, firstly, I want him to honestly be whoever he wants to be and whatever he wants to be when it comes to being an athlete. I don't want him to feel any pressure to be the best, but I really want him to be able to identify the best parts of sport. And the high performing side, as I mentioned, is great, but I think it does come with a price tag on it in terms of what you sacrifice and what parts of yourself that you're willing to push to the absolute breaking point. But I just want him to enjoy sport and, the community side of it. And if he does want to be a high-performing athlete, I'm going to support him in that as well. But, I think being an Olympic gold medalist, a Paralympic gold medalist is definitely not the be-all and end-all. I think finding your place, finding a place where you belong, and just finding a place that makes you happy, like that's where the gold medal really is for me. So that's kind of what I want Felix to learn quite quickly.
Magic.
Ellie Cole, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for coming on Sportish.
You as well. A Sportish goodbye. Thank you.
Wow. Ellie, I said it at the start of the conversation. She is one of my favorite humans in the world. The way that she can articulate and communicate about the Paralympic movement, about her experiences as a person with a disability, I just think we need to put her in all of the spaces to help create change in the work that she's doing.
I also loved this idea that we need to build inclusive spaces, and it's beyond actually disability. It's to do with gender, it's to do with sexuality. There are so many ways that we can make our sporting spaces inclusive, and the benefits go beyond that of the disability athletes or the female athletes or those of different sexual orientation. It benefits our whole community.
This series of Sportish is powered by the Australian Sports Commission's Play Well strategy. Play Well is about creating fun and inclusive sporting experiences for all Australians, because everyone has a place in sport. You can find out more about the Play Well strategy at ausport.gov.au/playwell. This series is produced by Dead Set Studios and hosted by us, Georgie and Libby Trickett. Thanks to executive producers Sarah Dabro and Kellie Riordan, producer Luci McAfee, and production manager Anne Chesterman.
Sportish and the Australian Sports Commission acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was made.
We recognise the outstanding contribution that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples make to sport and celebrate the power of sport to tell stories and promote reconciliation.